Hey, friendo, Steve here.
Hey, Larson.
And welcome back to another look at Dark Side of the Ring. Evan Husney's back with us. Before we had him and Jason Eisner. Of course, you guys are very, very busy these days, obviously, doing the press rounds. I imagine, I had asked this off camera, but I didn't get really an answer because I probably interrupted you. Are you guys still in production, post-production? Like, where are you in the season right now?
Oh, yeah, very much so. I mean, truthfully, we only have about 4 episodes done.
Wow.
So,
okay.
so the pressure is on. But I think by the end of this week, we'll have the next 4 done. So that's a big hurdle that we're building towards this week. And then we're starting to really get into the back half of the season because, like, the season is split into 2 pieces. And so then, but yeah, I mean, most everything's filmed, besides a couple of reenactments for the back half, but most of it's in the can, which is great. It's just a lot of post-production work now that we're having to weed through. But
and then you've got like press for season 3 right now, info, because it is premiering. We'll just get this out of the way now. Season 3 premieres Thursday. So I think we're putting this up Wednesday. So tomorrow night, 9 p.m. on Vice. And it looks like, am I reading this right? It's a 13 topic season. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. 14 episodes because Brian Pillman is a 2-parter, but 13 separate topics. Yeah. Wow. Hard to believe.
That's a lot. So that'll make the total, like the entire Dark Side catalog. What was seasons 1 and 2? Were they comparable to 13?
It'll be 30 episodes. It'll be 30.
Okay.
30 hours, 30 episodes, of the show that we've done, which is, I just would never have believed in the beginning that we would do 30 of anything.
That is a massive accomplishment. So number 1, congratulations.
Yes. Oh, wow.
That's
Thank
awesome.
You. Thank you.
Let's talk about the topics for season 3 before we dive into the Pillman episode. Because right now, like as we're mentioning this, Vice actually dropped the first episode on their YouTube channel of the Pillman episode, so we were able to watch that. What's been the feedback so far on that?
Oh, it's been great. It's following kind of a model we did last season where we dropped the first part of the Benoit show on the weekend prior as kind of like a little build up, to the second half. But yeah, no, the feedback's been great. It's been really cool to see people check it out early, talk about it, hear some early feedback on it. I mean, not many people have seen it outside of our inner circle, just maybe that's because of the pandemic and, maybe we'd be showing more people or having an event or who knows, but not a lot of people had really seen it before we actually dropped it, so it's cool just to see the feedback and because we've been working in such a vacuum, I feel like over the last year. So yeah, it was great. It's great to see that people, I'm really, really going to be interested to see how people react to the full show. Once you get the full story, because it's not just kind of, Brian Pillman's, demise, there's much more to the story after that, with what happens to the family after that and everything. So I'm really interested to see how people react to that. I think that the number 1 takeaway thus far has been Kim Wood, the NFL strength coach.
Yeah. He's already a meme. Yeah. There's already,
he's already
a
shrug. Yeah.
The shrug.
He's already, exactly. He seems to be one of the standout interviews. He's such a character and I love him and it was awesome to see him pop in that episode.
So, okay, I guess one of the questions we get most often, has to do with the topics themselves. Number 1, I'm sure you guys, were interested in the feedback when Vice released, probably, I think it was like a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago, when they released like the width and breadth of the topics. We'll go over those in a second, but what was your take on the feedback for the actual release of the topics? What were people saying?
To be honest, like when I saw, the tweet that we put out that was just like, here's them all listed. I was kind of like, damn, I was like, wow, like that's a lot of it's a diverse in tone, in terms of the types of episodes and stories that we're covering. A lot of them, also have to, obviously we have a process in how we determine those, but a lot of them were, viewer request, or request from interview subjects themselves. Like, so, and some of them our own personal ones that we wanted to see for sure. But yeah, it is an expansive list of of episodes covering all different eras and styles of wrestling. It's been really cool to see that from what I'm seeing, like the feedback is really good on it, and people seem to be pretty hyped for it being a good mixture of really more mainstream stories. Ultimate Warrior, Steroid, if you want to call the Steroid Trials a mainstream episode, but also just like, some of the more deeper cut Johnny K-9s and the things like that, which I think is great.
I didn't actually know anything about Johnny K-9 until Larson dropped it in the notes. I was like, whoa, Johnny K-9, what the hell is that? And then I was like, oh, let me look this up. So that's one I'm really llooking forward to, because I don't really know a whole lot about that.
That was one of the topics. Like, being a pretty avid wrestling fan, pretty much all the topics listed, we're like, oh, okay, cool, looking forward to that. Johnny K-9, what is that about?
Is that a Mortal Kombat character? What is that?
Yeah. Like that was one thing I was like, I'm not familiar with that story whatsoever. And so I guess we'll just jump off and start talking about some of the topics, I guess. How did you discover the Johnny K-9 story, and why don't you think that's more well known in wrestling circles?
Well, I mean, he's a very obscure wrestler, and it just goes to be, it just goes back to our criteria, which is just a story first. Whatever the most compelling story is going to be, not just to wrestling fans. That factors in, a teeny bit, but it's more just about like any viewer is, wrestling fan or not, is just going to be captivated by this hour of TV. Because our show is very much just like the human stories set in wrestling. And that story in particular was one that was on our radar for the past, couple seasons, but it was actually Jim Cornette who was like, can I request that you look into my old pal, Bruiser Bedlam? He also wrestled under the name Bruiser Bedlam. Can you check into him? And I only knew just the cliff notes, and anytime we start out an episode just knowing the basics and we get kind of sent off on this journey, those are the most fun episodes to make, or the most fascinating ones, because you're learning about it as you're going. And that episode's crazy because it's ostensibly, Johnny K-9 was a jobber on WWF TV in late 80s, early 90s, kind of in that Michigan, Ontario area. So you would see him on those old shows. And then after that, he was working the indie circuit in the early 90s, and Jim Cornette was booked on some indie show, and he had Smoky Mountain just starting up, and he saw this guy in the back who just looked like this turn of the century strong man, huge guy, handlebar mustache, and he had this tattoo on his stomach that said "True to the Crew," and it was always kind of like this ominous thing. But Cornette was like, okay, we're gonna book you and turn you into, he rebranded him as Bruiser Bedlam and made him Smoky Mountain's top heel for about a year. I mean, he beat Bullet Bob Armstrong. He actually beat Randy Savage clean in a Smoky Mountain Wrestling, which is pretty crazy. But the reason that the story is so fascinating is, while that was going on, and after his wrestling career kind of faded away, it came to light in the media that he was essentially the chapter president of the Satan's Choice motorcycle gang in Ontario. So he is like a high-ranking member of one of the most ruthless biker gangs up there. And he has been alleged to have taken part in a police station bombing of a police station.
Oh my gosh.
And a double homicide. Of a prosecutor and her husband. He's never convicted of those crimes, but he's since passed on. But it is just a wild story of the life of a wrestling jobber meets the life of a biker gang president. So it's definitely one of those episodes I'm really excited for people to check out, because it's just that true crime vibe. It's two worlds colliding, and it's just really wild to see, like, oh yeah, like Chris Jericho or Lance Storm, like, yeah, he crashed at the Smoky Mountain Flophouse. Meanwhile, in Ontario, some other crazy shit's going down.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. So 13 topics this season. How big was your initial list? And did COVID had to have played a factor in some of these topics being chosen or not?
Well, not necessarily the COVID playing a role in the topics being picked, but we had a big list. I mean, as soon as season 2 wrapped up and Vice was like came to us wanting another season, and then they were like 14 episodes is what they sort of dropped on us, and we're like, whoa, that's ambitious, especially during a pandemic. So we were just kind of like, whoa, we have ideas, but we need more, for sure. So we just got together and again, just went back to, took the ones that we had always wanted to do. There were some that were kind of holdovers from season 2 that we really wanted to do, and we wanted to make sure we got in there. Brian Pillman was one of those. Also, Collision in Korea was one of those. Just wanting to see those, finally make it, and then having to come up with, other ones to do. And COVID played a role in the production, in a lot of different ways. I mean, mainly because, we've been all working remotely, as everyone is, but we normally we'd be flying all around doing these interviews, going to people's homes and filming that way. And so we've had to adapt to actually driving it this whole time. So
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So there's been several trips with me, some without me, where, we'll hop in an RV and, we'll drive 10,000 miles across country. Jeez. All around. Yeah. And that's what we did for, most of it was actually just hitting the road, and driving. Okay, we got to start in LA and wind up in Charlotte and, just do all the interviews. Wow. And that's how we did it. So that was a wild, could have been another show in and of itself. Kidding. Yeah, and then of course the reenactments, and there's a lot of the protocols for shooting on set and everything, and we've been following those. So safety has been the primary thing for us going into this, as the top factor. But the second factor was that we didn't want to sacrifice the quality of the show in any way. Like, so if we could find a way to do it as safe as possible but keep the show the same, then we'll do it. And so that's thankfully we've been able to do the show the exact same way, but it's just like behind the scenes, it's a little more rigorous and a lot more protocols, but yeah.
Totally.
One of the names that stood out to me, sorry, Larson, you can take the next
one. Go ahead.
One of the names that stood out to me in this season is Nick Gage. Now, traditionally, typically, you guys stick with like historical events, or people who have sort of either passed away or retired or what have you. Nick is interesting because he's still wrestling. He's still active. He's the current GCW champion. His profile now is probably higher. I mean, you could argue that he's in his prime right now. Was there any hesitation to explore something that's so current? What was the decision-making process on Nick Gage?
Yeah, it was never something I ever considered. I never thought when we were planning the show that we would like kind of go more this contemporary, I guess, for the show. Most of the stories that we tell are ones that really have that clear beginning, middle, and an end, and that sort of thing. And with this story, it was, well, first, Nick Gage is just his life journey, was fascinating from that point of view. So it was hard to deny the human interest qualities that are there with that story. But it was a kind of a new challenge. It was like, can we take, all of this, but also make it sort of a snapshot of, Nick right now? Because the story's not over. I mean, in some ways, there's chapters that are still just starting, and that was a really cool, unique challenge that I think kind of opened doors for maybe trying to do that in the future, and it was really just, deathmatch wrestling, that style of deathmatch wrestling is not necessarily my go-to. It's not my cup of tea, if you will. Yeah. And I mean, and in the process of making the show and putting it together, there's been many a times where I've just like, oh my God, I'm going to have a panic attack from watching this stuff. Or it's like, our standards and practices folks, it's the only time they've been a little curt with us and like, nah. That's not going to happen on this show.
Right.
And so we had to have little workarounds, but it's been really interesting. And Nick was our first interview we did of the whole season 3. And he's great. And he really is, he feels kind of like an old school, wrestler to some extent, because he's very believable. And, there is part of him where, I think he's got one foot in the gimmick and one foot, in who he is. And he does blur those lines. He's a guy you can believe in, but as John Moxley says in the actual episode, he talks about how like Vince McMahon would probably kill to have one guy who has that level of a connection with an audience these days. And I think Nick he is connected. I think he's kind of the most over indie wrestler in a lot of ways, and I'm just really excited to see where it's going to go for him from here. I hope this episode does kind of help push him into the next level, because I think he is a talent.
Definitely.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see that episode and sort of match it up against the New Jack episode, because there's clearly plenty of parallels there in terms of their careers and personalities. Did you see that as well when you saw Nick Gage and you had already interviewed New Jack and done an entire episode on him?
I sort of felt that in the beginning, that like, the New Jack episode for us in season 2, like definitely is one that people always talk about, and it left a big impression, I think, on viewers. And because it went there with kind of the hardcore deathmatch sort of extreme style. And I think that shocked people, but and they like that experience. And I think this definitely is going to go there. It's definitely going to push the envelope into that. There's, like I said, there's moments where I was starting to feel like I'm going to pass out here from watching this, but I think it's going to satisfy that. But it is a very different story, also. But it is pretty wild, at the same time, in terms of just the breadth of everything that he's endured, in his life is pretty crazy. But great guy, awesome guy, and just really, really looking forward to what's next for Nick.
That's cool.
Definitely. While we're on the topic of deathmatch wrestling, let's talk FMW.
Yeah.
This seems like a pretty deep cut and one that Steve and I are really fascinated in. We're not like super familiar. I think we know the major story beats of the promotion. We've seen some of their matches. Some of their matches go completely out of control. So how did you discover FMW? And based on your interviews, your research, was there ever a time where they came up with a stipulation for a match that even they thought was too crazy to pull off?
Oh man, I love FMW. So going way back into probably, I don't even know, possibly the late 90s, early 2000s for me, like on the internet. I definitely remember seeing like that GIF of the exploding ring, and being like, what the fuck is this? And just being like, this is amazing. And that always left an impression on me of like, what is this world? And then, it's popped up every now and then again over the years for me. And but during lockdown last year, it was like my goal I'm going to do the FMW deep dive for me personally as a wrestling fan. And there's a guy named Brett who runs the FMW kind of fan Instagram, website, YouTube channel. And this guy, you got to follow this guy. He is the encyclopedia of FMW history. Oh, wow. And he edits together these videos on YouTube. Some of them have been taken down, but if you go through his website, he has the unlisted links, and he'll cut together just like this half an hour Masato Tanaka greatest hits video comp. And dude has got editing chops, because he edits them all with music, and it's like, here's all the best. You can throw this on and it'll warp your brain, because it's amazing. So I've been like, I got to find out more about this. So he has a top 100 in order FMW matches list. Yeah, this guy's the best. And so I started to go through all of it. Like literally I was like, I'm doing it. And like, yeah, his number one like is the number one, and it's actually like a women's match too, which is amazing. Combat Toyota versus Megumi Kodo, and it's a no rope barbed wire exploding match, but it's so good. It's so freaking good, and the way the psychology that goes into play into the match, it's just amazing. But anyway, so I did the deep dive, and so this one for me is just kind of all right. We're doing FMW. I don't give a shit kind of thing, like for this season, and it's to me as like a filmmaker, like I just appreciate it so much on a cinematic level, because obviously there's a lot of ridiculous matches, don't get me wrong, but like the best of FMW is some of my favorite shot filmed wrestling, like the production, the actual production quality and the performance. Like, I love how in the high profile, like in the high profile matches with Onita, you always had this epilogue where he's like crying, for 10 minutes after the match, and like that first Terry Funk Onita exploding ring match is so amazing, because the storytelling of like after that happens, he has to go in and save Terry, and then they're arm in arm, and they're both crying, and they're bringing they're like carrying each other back into the back, and this like emotional Japanese guitar solo music is playing, and there's like smoke in the background. It's amazing. It's like the Undertaker's like cinematic match, but like in front of 30,000 people, which is the magic of FMW. So that being said, I wanted to just expose more people to that promotion, because I think it is some of the craziest, most amazing shit you can see, but also because just the drama behind the scenes in terms of how FMW came together. And then, of course, Onita passed this company off to another owner who inherited a lot of debt. And then the Yakuza got involved, and then the owner actually wound up taking his own life. And it's a crazy story in and of itself. So it's going to be one of my more favorite, personal faves, that when we unveil that one.
Yeah, I think when we both saw that, we're like, man, that's the one. Like as near and dear to our hearts as the XPW episode is going to be, like the FMW one, like that's one thing that we've always been really curious about, but I don't think we've ever really bothered to sort of do our own deep dive on it.
Yeah, it's been the thing where we kind of do, like I said, we know the major story beats, about the Hayabusa stuff.
Oh yeah, that too. Yeah.
Not specifics a great deal, but we know enough that we're like, oh man, this is one that top of our list that we're definitely looking forward to for sure.
Cool. That's great.
Let's see here. Okay, this is a great question. So we always come back around to this. In previous seasons, Vince McMahon, he's been lurking in the background. A lot of the stories. This year, there's like a giant spotlight on him. The federal government tried to take down Vince McMahon in the steroid trial. Did your perception of Vince change at all after focusing and having to research an entire episode on him?
Well, I think for viewers, it's going to be a different perspective on Vince for that episode, because, it is kind of like, in a way, it's like the dark thing that's happening, in this episode is kind of happening to Vince in this episode, because, he's being, indicted by the federal government on these charges. And, even though the case against him was a little weird and probably wasn't going to stick because it is a little strange and seems really hard to prove. But I think there was a possibility that, he could have gone away for many years, and, who knows how that would have changed wrestling. But it's a fascinating story, because you see I think like fans are aware of it, but they don't really know like the actual like the details. And I think that this is one of the episodes we researched almost the heaviest. We went way in on looking at all of this, and you could probably make it your own. It could be its own like 5-part doc on this whole thing. But I think it's really fascinating that so much of the wrestling storyline and the wrestling world spills out into this courtroom, and you really see like down to the jurors when they're doing jury selection, and the jurors are like, trying to get out of jury selection because that, wrestling's fake, I don't, and that's like how they're, it's like, what? Why does that have anything to do with it? But also you're seeing, Hulk Hogan has to testify against Vince, and I mean that's like, you can't book that, and it's like, that was right at a time when he had left to go to WCW, and this episode and the story goes deep into their relationship. And it really goes into the relationship of Vince and his attorney Jerry McDivitt, who's actually interviewed in the episode.
Wow,
and,
that's impressive.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And I mean, it's kind of about him in a lot of ways. It's about Jerry because he's an incredible attorney, and and he had to kind of become the nation's top expert on steroids, in order to like win this trial. And the other thing that's interesting about Jerry is that, when you have the federal government, coming down on you and indicting, and charging you with this crime, and as a defense attorney, he literally, and there was others as part of his team too, of course, but he didn't call a single witness, for this entire trial. So if you imagine that, Jerry's winning this trial based upon his abilities to cross-examine the government's witness, it's really impressive.
Yeah.
So we wanted to just kind of show this wild sweeping story and kind of show Vince in a different light. And now that we have kind of a company perspective in the show, that's a first.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that can open some other doors potentially for future episodes. So you never know.
Yeah. You mentioned just briefly, sticking with this episode, and I'm not going to ask for any spoilers on it, but you mentioned, had Vince been locked up, there have been like plenty of rumors that have been sort of like bandied about, some more corroborated than others, about who would have been left in charge of does the episode get to the bottom of that as much as it possibly can?
I think that well, we'll see if it makes the final cut. To be quite honest, it's kind of one of those things where I know it's kind of like if you go back to the Gino episode, it's kind of about like, everyone wanted to know about, is Paul Bosch Gino's father?
Right, yeah.
And it's like, it's one of those kind of rumor things that like everyone wants to know the answer to, but like at the end of the day, is it gonna really get its runtime in this with the matters at hand? But it definitely, I think there's like, some clarity where the confusion between how some folks may believe that it was, that this is what was supposed to happen, and or if it really was going to happen, or how far they really got. But I think it's like, will this be like a specific answer to it, or will it muddy the water? Maybe it'll muddy the waters even more. I don't know. But tune in.
Any good piece of art will do that, I guess.
Yeah. Exactly. But I will. If it doesn't make the cut, we'll obviously put it out in some other.
Yeah,
definitely.
It's always been a really interesting question.
Definitely. Speaking of the steroid trial, one of the wrestlers that testified against Vince, Nails. Did you happen to nail down Nails for an interview for this?
Man, let me just say that we really tried, and we really wanted to.
Yeah.
And it was a yes at first, and then it became a no, and I was bummed because I just wanted to get him on the show, and then I just wanted to pitch shift his voice down like for the whole interview, So let me tell you about, like, I love that. That's so cool. I'm surprised that only one wrestler has had that gimmick, unless someone corrects me. But oh yeah, it didn't work out, unfortunately. But yeah, you're going to hear a lot about Nails, so you're going to hear about him.
You bring up kind of a cool point, though, in terms of right now the show has a reputation that precedes itself. Like everybody knows it now, and I'm sure like that was probably the case after season 1. You had that backlog. Okay, hey, now this is who we are. This is what we do. So going into, and I think we talked about this the last time we talked. Going into season 2, it was maybe a little bit easier people to open up more. By the end of season 2, you guys had like, your reputation had gone like through the roof in terms of anticipation for season 3. Did that help you even more? Did that like alter your approach? Did you ask for stuff that maybe you would have been a bit more delicate about before, because now everybody knows who you are?
I think with the wrestlers, like the wrestlers themselves, they're all aware of the show now for the most part. Not all of them have seen it, but they're definitely aware of it. And it helps with that kind of conversation starter, when you're talking about an episode. But there's definitely been instances where even still, wrestlers are either, they don't want to, they don't want to create any heat with WWE, or they have a relationship that they can't and this, and they don't want to talk because of that or other reasons. So there's still challenges that you deal with in terms of getting access, even though the show has more of more credibility now, if you will. But family members, because that is a huge part of the show too. It's at first family members typically haven't heard of it, but I think being able to share the episodes from last season has helped us a lot. Like I know, for example, the Ultimate Warrior episode that we're doing is in large part features his first wife, Sherry. That's kind of what the episode is more or less. It's almost an episode about her, to be quite honest. She didn't know the show when we reached out to her, but she was married to Warrior from before he was a wrestler. And all the way through to his title win, when he won the world title. Oh, wow. So she made a lot of relationships with these guys over the years. And so when she went back and saw the Von Erich episode, because, Warrior was very close to Kevin Von Erich, to Kerry Von Erich. Mm-hmm. And, seeing that, and then Warrior was very close to Owen, and seeing, the Owen episode. And then she kind of got a sense for what we were trying to do. And then that made her feel more comfortable. And so in that ways, it helps a lot to be able to point to more examples of the show. Where in season 1 we didn't have any of that, which was really hard. That was the hardest to get access, but it's still, I'm never surprised when someone tells me no, so it still happens for sure.
Right. Mm-hmm. I'm glad you brought up the Ultimate Warrior. So you guys are doing an episode on Warrior. WWE famously produced 2 very different documentaries on Warrior. Yeah. There was, of course, the self-destruction of the Ultimate Warrior, which was like probably their best. It was either that or Rise and Fall of ECW. Those were two just outstanding.
yeah.
But of course, that first one was kind of a troll job on the Warrior because they, you know, they were not at a good point in their relationship. Later on, they did a second Warrior documentary when they had made amends with him, and they sort of, I think they stopped offering the self-destruction one.
Yeah.
How did you guys approach Warrior? Because his legacy is like obviously pretty complex.
Well, you know, to be very honest, it was hard for many, many, many reasons. One, Ultimate Warrior was not a subject that I feel like was really on my radar as a potential for this show ever. Until recently, you know, when we started asking our viewers what do they want to see, and I was just kind of taken aback by just how many fans or viewers wanted to see that story. I was just like, whoa, okay, Ultimate Warrior seems to be like, if you were to chart all these, it would probably be near the top. So I was kind of trying to figure out, well, how would you do that? Like, what does it look like, you know? And so we looked at it, and you know, and like the last thing, because obviously he's one of the more contentious, at least among wrestlers. You know, a lot of wrestlers have some very intense stories or things to say about him. So it's like I didn't want it to just be a repeat of the self-destruction of the Ultimate Warrior either. But you know, there is kind of the blurred lines aspect. That's one of the things that we look for in a story is where does your personality stop and start and your character take over, or vice versa. And that seemed to fit that theme that we like to explore quite well. But also, like, you know, it wasn't really until we met Sherry that it seemed like, okay, this is a really interesting human story about a relationship where, you know, she married Jim Hellwig, Ultimate Warrior. She married him when he was a chiropractor, you know? So,
Wow.
So she's thinking that this is going to be their life, you know? He's going to be a chiropractor, and, you know, imagine like marrying a chiropractor and then like a handful of years later, he's the WWF world champion.
He's
like
Warrior,
that would be a wild roller coaster ride of like, okay, I didn't really quite sign up for this, but let's see where it goes. And so that to me, like it is kind of a lot about that and the emotions behind that. And I think what was really important to her, and I hope we succeed in, is that just to humanize him as a character or as a person, you know, like, you know, nobody's going to know you better than the people that, you know, you were with. Right. So it's like, that was what was really important to her. It was like, you know, a lot of people have said a lot of things over the years, but what they don't understand is that are complexities behind it. And I think our show tries to examine those complexities. And that's what we tried to do with this story. That being said, a lot of the people we go to for interviews normally aren't, you know, have the most, you know, cheerful things to say about him. So it was a challenge in that regard too. Or it's just like, you can just hear it in their voice, you know? Even that all being said, the way that he passed away is, you know, is tragic and sad and was wild, you know, for many, many reasons too. So
that's definitely going to be an interesting one.
Oh, I just wanted to say one more thing too about it, which is, I think it is very fitting that there's the A&E documentary that's coming out and ours. I think out of any wrestler, you know, he's one of the more enigmatic personalities wrestling has ever seen. I think it's very appropriate that there is two documentaries, which I'm assuming will be very different, coming out about him. I think it's very fitting for the Ultimate Warrior to have that.
Yeah, you're right. In the end, it's going to make 4 altogether because WWE, like I said, did 2, and then you guys have yours, and then A&E is going to have theirs, and it's like, talk about a complex individual. I mean, you know, I appreciate what you're getting at with, you know, when you talk to somebody who married the chiropractor and then she ended up with the Ultimate Warrior, and, you know, so much of Warrior, you know, his later reputation, you know, was from, you know, unfortunately clips that you see him talking about stuff, you know, that you can find on YouTube now. And, you know, it's sort of easy to dismiss that as, oh, this guy's just a nut. But, you know, to deep dive and say, okay, well, he was a human being. He has layers. What led him to become
Where's that
what
coming
he
from?
was? Yeah, exactly. Where's that coming from? Which is ultimately like the best question you could be asking.
Last time we talked to you, we spoke a lot about kind of stylistically what has influenced the show. I know we talked about the recreations being inspired by Thin Blue Line. There were some like Malik references during the Von Erich episode. Are there any other stylistic kind of references, inspirations that we can expect in season 3 along those same lines?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, trying to think just so I make sure that I have a sharp example of that. Going into like each episode, there's lots in little different ways, like with the music, like when we're sort of putting like a show together, it's like, okay, let's come up with like a palette, for the music, or, like I think we talked about last time with, season 2, like whenever we started working on the Brawl for All episode, it was all about, this is going to be our Mortal Kombat show, or whatever, and like, let's make the music have that quality, in terms of like that kind of house, fight style. And then I think we tried to incorporate that as much as possible. And you actually see like you see the grids of the matches, and, with the New Jack episode, Halloween was a big influence because, we sort of looked at the story as like, Jim Cornette is Dr. Loomis, and, New Jack is Mike Myers, who's escaped, and he's got a, and then of course, so the music was a lot of that sort of like, the sort of gangster rap from the early 90s mixed with that kind of slasher music vibe. And that's what we really went with. So for this episode, there is a lot of those sort of, or the season, there's a lot of that similar kind of discussion that goes into these episodes. And if my brain wasn't so fragmented, I could probably come up with a few. I know for the Johnny K-9 episode, like, man, it's crazy because that episode, without spoiling anything, I mean, it's the first show we've ever done where like SWAT teams are like showing up more than once, you know? So like we had to like go into like, and it's wild that like, that's some of the things we had to shoot for this show. It was like full on things like that. But in terms of cinematic influences, I don't know, I'm kind of shitting the bed here in terms of like, giving up a specific example, but it happens all the time where we're like, we'll be watching something and we share a clip with somebody and it's like that, I remember I watched some like, I was on Tubi and I watched some weird, really deep cut erotic thriller from like the late 80s, early 90s. And like, there's this amazing saxophone jam that's playing in this, in this movie. And I was like, that's going to be for Johnny K-9. Like, and you'll hear it like exactly right in there, or, things like that. So, I mean, there's just so many influences that come to play every day. For one of the episodes we haven't talked about yet, the Grizzly Smith, Jake Roberts episode too. It's like tonally that episode takes place a lot in the South, like in Texas and Louisiana. And we wanted like, to really explore kind of almost remember like from a music point of view, like Breaking Bad was kind of like an influence in terms of the music, like the score of that show was an influence on this episode because it fit everything really well. I remember that was just one off the top of my head, but yeah, I probably after this I'll come up with 800 more. And
right. Yeah, no, exactly. No, it is interesting to see the sort of the development, the evolution of that sort of unique look that you guys have and how you are able to play with that and add different layers to that original influence that you mentioned with the Thin Blue Line. It is just, I mean, just in the first episode, the Pillman episode, we can talk about that a little. Well, actually, no, there's a great question here. So Larson came up with this question. It's about Supreme and XPW. Of course, him being lit on fire is definitely a strong wrestling memory for us. Were you able to uncover, any new information about that? Like, who did you get to, I'm assuming, like, I know he recently. Did you interview him before he passed away? Because he passed away pretty recently.
Sorry, who was that?
Supreme from XPW?
No, we didn't get a chance to interview him. No, but that incident is definitely going to be very much featured in the.
Did you recreate? Are you guys recreating the Supreme Fire incident?
Well, we actually haven't shot those reenactments yet for that episode, so TBD. But obviously a lot of folks we talked to for that episode had a lot to say about that incident for sure, and had just so many great things to say about him as a person, and that was a real source of emotion for a lot of the folks that we talked to for that episode for sure. Yeah, so that'll be definitely wait for that one. That's definitely going to be touched on.
Yeah, it was crazy because I think he just passed like last year, and like the outpouring of support and love from me. I kind of knew that he was still active, I think, in training in SoCal, but I didn't quite realize just how many people, he really touched along the way. And it made it extra tragic,
Yeah,
definitely.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. So if you guys are like have you gone back and seen the footage and like, can you like see like you guys in the front row at all?
I actually watched, because I was doing, there was an interview I found with, what's his name? He used to wrestle around here by the name of the Gigolo here in Northern California, Steve Rosano. I don't know if you got a chance to talk to him, but he was the guy,
I don't think so.
One of the guys who was part of the Enterprise with Veronica Kane, Veronica Kane is one who put all the lighter fluid on the table. And years ago, I found an interview with him where he talked about the incidents. I think it was like on a GeoCities site, so it's gone now. And I spent like a good 20 minutes trying to find that interview again to find some more information about it. And apparently, it's gone. But I went and watched the video today, and it's so grainy. And I think we are. The camera's facing the side we would have been on, because we were about 8 rows back.
We'll have to look for you guys. I'll have to look for you guys in there.
Yeah.
Much skinnier version of me, and a much more hair on top and a lot less on the face. I think back then. I don't think you had a beard back then.
Yeah, that was July 2001. So I was probably pre-beard.
Pre-beard.
Let's talk about the Pillman episode. Like I said, I mentioned the first episode is on Vice's YouTube channel. The episode premiere. Is it part one's going to debut week 1 and then part 2? So it's actually like 2. It's not parts 1 and 2 dropping at the same time. It's 1 and then.
Oh
2
no, it
after.
is.
Oh, it is. Okay. Yep. Wow, that's awesome.
Yep.
Okay, great.
The full 2-hour show is on Thursday.
That's awesome. So Brian Pillman, what was it about his story that you guys felt would be the reason to debut season 3? Because you did that with Benoit last season, which obviously Benoit, probably the most high profile episode topic that you had. I mean, arguably anyways. What made you decide Pillman should go in that spot this time around?
First, the Pillman story is one that's just kind of been on our radar a lot, because it does, again, talk about a guy who blurred the lines. It's kind of hard to find someone who tops that, in terms of the industry. But he, that story was always fascinating to us. And, to be honest, before we actually made it, like my knowledge of, Brian's full story, I would say is more was like regulated to the more wrestling loose cannon stuff, not necessarily the stuff in his personal life, which is equally fascinating, if not more. And so it was always like our goal, it's hard to do. It's hard to do the episode without Steve Austin. That was kind of our thought. It's like you got to have Steve, because their careers are so linked at 2 very important times in their full trajectory. And so I don't think we really had the street cred while we were making season 2 in order to have gotten Steve on board. So it was one that we kind of sidelined for that reason. And then we were just fortunate enough to get him for season 3. But when we started working on the show, honestly, it was supposed to be a 1-hour show. And then when we started working on it and the roster of interviews started growing, okay, we're going to interview now 4 to 5 family members, and we're going to interview, it's going to keep going and going and going. And then it's like, wow, it's really hard to fit when you have that many voices, it's really hard to fit into an hour. And so we started looking at it and then realized, the story does not stop with Brian's passing. It keeps going. There's more to this in the aftermath of all that, and then there's like a whole other side to it, which I don't want to spoil. But so for us, it was like, man, I don't know how there's no way to do this. And I think when people see the episode, especially on Thursday, they're going to be like, oh yeah, I could totally see that. So I had to actually retroactively go back and to the network and actually make a giant case to like, okay, we got to make this a 2-parter. And, sometimes that can be complicated because the network wants those 14 original concepts. And now you have to be like, well, we're going to take one away or something. And then we're going to combine this, and then you're going to lose a week of the, air. So, I'm so glad we did, because I just don't see how it would have worked. And I think it adds so much to it, to be able to breathe in that way. And, so everything just kind of clicked in place. And then when we got Steve, it's like, well, this is a perfect way to kick it off. You have one of the biggest names in wrestling, a part of it. And then you also just have this, epic story, to tell, of a guy who could have been a giant megastar in the business.
Yeah.
Was given that you guys had seasons 1 and 2, as your sort of introductory icebreaker, was getting Austin pretty easy?
Well, it was when we started putting it together, we didn't know like the exact right way to make the inroads, but it was actually Jim Ross. Great guy, super supportive of us, and we're super grateful, for him. He's he's always just been so good to us. And I think we were down there doing the interviews, and it wasn't like in stone that we were going to get Steve. And he was just like, well, I can't imagine you guys doing this episode without him. So, and I was like, I'd be happy to reach out to him for you. And I was like, that's great.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
And so then I'm sitting there one night, I can't remember. It was like right in the beginning of season 3. I'm sitting there and all of a sudden, bing, I look at my phone. It's like text chain with Jim Ross and Steve Austin. And like 11-year-old of me is shitting his pants.
That's fantastic.
But it was great, and then he was so cool. That's the thing too. That was just like, like obviously, there's a few folks you talk to where you really mark out, but like when we did eventually shoot the interview with Steve, afterwards, it was just best to be able to bullshit with him about wrestling because he's such a student of it. He knows everything about it. He's such a like a historian almost about wrestling. He knows so much about it. And it was just cool afterwards, crack a few Steve Weisers and talk about world class, was pretty freaking cool. But he was just great. Class act, so good in the episode, and just super, super grateful that he allowed us to do that. I mean, I can't even begin to thank him. And it was cool because I met him when I was 11.
Yeah.
I can't remember if I told that story on here.
I don't think so.
Oh, yeah. Well, I got to meet him, like, my dad hooked it up through some, he was putting out that Stone Cold Metal CD. I don't know if y'all remember that, but
yeah.
And my dad was working for doing the promotion for that at the time. And he got to hook up like a private sort of like,
man.
meet my son moment, which I have footage of, which is hilarious.
Oh, that's great.
And it's actually the first, like, I was just blown away. And I got to actually ask him like a question. I had to make an impression. In my mind, I was like, my 11-year-old mind, I was like, I can't leave here without embarrassing myself. So I actually went up to him. This is 1998. I actually went up to him and I was like, so my friends are wondering, what do you think of Bill Goldberg? Because
My friends are wondering. That's great.
yeah, of course, because I'm super freaking nervous. And he gave me just like this really good, like, semi in character, but also kind of from the heart answer about like, well, I think he's copying me. He's doing a pretty good job of copying me. Which because you never heard them talk about each other in '98.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm getting the scoop here, and it was just so cool. He's like, he's got a family, he's got a feed too, or whatever. And then it was cool because then, of course, when I meet him this time around, I was like, I asked you the question, when I was 11. I'm going to ask you it again. What do you think of Bill Goldberg?
Because my friends still want to know.
My friends still want to know. Yeah, no, but it was what an awesome guy. Can't say enough good about Steve.
That's awesome. It's
awesome.
It's crazy, just sort of as an aside about Austin. It's insane how in a business, especially back in the Attitude Era, when everybody from back then would talk about what kind of sharks they were backstage, the guy who made the most money, who is the biggest star like of all time, is so friendly with so many wrestlers, and he's such a brilliant interviewer.
Yeah.
And it's just it's interesting to know that a guy like he's got seemingly no heat with anybody. With all these different personalities in the industry, it's interesting.
I think he is just, I think he's on another level of, intelligence and, I mean, he's just a really disarmingly nice guy for, his gimmick and his character and very smart and just, knows the business really well. And, and its history and all the people and his crossed roads with everybody, but just awesome.
So going back to Pillman really quick, now that we mentioned Steve Austin, biggest star of the Attitude Era, where do you personally feel had Pillman not been taken so young and so early, because he was like right, and I think obviously I haven't seen episode 2 yet because only episode 1 is on the YouTube channel, but from the teaser, I feel like you guys are going to sort of head in the direction where Pillman's sort of the blueprint for the Attitude Era. And he really is. And I'm wondering where
Yeah.
you think his career would have gone had he not been taken so young or at all.
Well, I think, I think the part two of Pillman is definitely going to resurface the Pillman's got a gun, thing. How could it not? And then you think back to that when that happened in '96, and you're like, they still had the little other logo. It wasn't even the added. They had like
the scratch logo. Yeah,
it wasn't a scratch logo, and like so you're like, what the hell's going on? Is pulling out a gun and like doinks on next or something? Like
right. Yeah.
That's pretty cutting edge,
Yeah.
and it's cool because Steve still stands by it, which I love too. Is that whole that angle is very, it's divisive, very polarizing still to this day. Like, you have people in the episode who are like, I don't like the idea they had a gun on there and the whole thing, and of course there's reasons for that, but at the same time it's like, to put that in the full context of what was going on in that company at that time in '96, to do something like that, and especially when you look at just how amazing it's filmed, too. When Steve's like taking that bat and just like smashing the window to the door, and it's like we're watching something really, like we're watching a crazy found footage like domestic
right.
like abduction thing. It's crazy. And it's wild to go back and look at that, but I think you can't deny the fact that those types of ideas and what Pillman and Steve were doing then is like, I mean, it definitely is helping to pave that way in a major way, especially back in '96. So I think that, had Pillman, obviously everyone talks about the wreck, and the wreck being the thing that derailed everything, because it just, when you're going to learn kind of the physical state that he was sort of, physical and mental state he was sort of in, trying to keep that up in the WWF. And it was obviously just horrifying to try and wrestle with those injuries, or to disguise those injuries, or to keep going in some capacity. And, others talk about, were there other avenues that Brian, even if the accident had happened, were there other ways he could have still been a star? And I mean, I do kind of think that he would have been great on the commentary. I think he would have been like just a cool, crazy voice to hear on Raw, and I could totally picture him and JR like being, or what, not to throw any shade on King, but, I could have seen it, I totally could have seen it, but that's not what he wanted to do. He wanted to be the in-ring crazy performer, and it's just, it's a shame.
Yeah.
Definitely.
No, it's interesting stuff. We have a couple of questions here from our patrons over on Patreon. Let's see here. This is from, this is kind of interesting. Griff Grizzly asks, are there any subjects you had to bail out on, either due to it being too morbid or the rabbit hole goes deeper than you were comfortable with?
No. No, there's nothing that we've bailed on, because it's actually a question we get a lot, is if it's too dark, or anything like that. I think that in some ways the Grizzly Smith episode, raises the bar in that regard, in terms of just difficult subject matter. But there's definitely been stories that, I shouldn't name them just in case. Never say never.
Yeah, of course.
But there are definitely been stories that we just haven't gotten the access to, or now is not the right time. Maybe next season, maybe next year, or just it's something that's like, because I mean that definitely happened in season 1. We sort of tried to do a Chris Benoit episode then, which there was no way it would have worked. We had no access.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. But no. Other than just not having access, that's the only time that's ever really happened.
This question here from, sorry, Larson, go ahead.
I was going to say one from Church Jackson here about prospects for season 4. It says, would it be possible to get an episode about Louis Spicoli?
That's interesting. Now is a good time to, I'm definitely interested to hear, any other ideas. I think, commenters on YouTube, definitely put in some of the other ideas. Cause I mean, honestly, like obviously there's no confirmation of a season 4 or anything yet. I mean, we have to see how season 3 does, but it's always good to have them, it's good to have them at, at the ready when we need them. So, season 3, like, again, like with Ultimate Warrior is a good example. That one I probably wouldn't have done if, viewers just didn't want to really see it. So I'm curious to think, now that you've seen all the 14 that have been unveiled, what are the ones now that we're going to look at? So, I mean, yeah, Louis Spicolli, God, I remember watching him on Nitro for sure. Definitely an interesting story, beloved guy behind the scenes. But yeah, hit us up in the comments.
I'm sure we'll do another top 10 where we'll.
Oh yeah, you got it.
We'll feed you some. Definitely. We'll feed you some.
Yeah. Okay, please.
Please. We have no problem with that. I love this question here. You sort of mentioned this a little bit, kind of half jokingly with the Nick Gage stuff, but Blake Whitehouse has a question, and it's, I thought this during the Pillman episode too, especially with the custody stuff, was absolutely heartbreaking. And with Pillman's first wife's death.
Shelley,
Blake Whitehouse asked, does it take a mental toll on either of you when you research or interview? Because these are heavy subjects that, I mean, just as a viewer, when I was watching the custody stuff, it was like, oh my God, that's horrifying for these. Like, this little girl goes up and hugs her mom and it turns into a big thing. Does it ever take a mental toll on you guys, or the people who are out there doing the interviews?
Well, yeah, definitely. That's a good question. First off, I think, over the process of making the show, there have been times where definitely for interview subjects has been very hard. I think that the Chris Benoit story of season 2 is probably the most intense example of that, because, there were folks who, did interviews. I mean, David Benoit, especially, who I tend to think probably hadn't really told his story maybe ever, to anyone. It seemed like that was something that was coming through the first time. And of course, me, Chavo Guerrero Jr., Sandra Toffolani, we were all there to support him in that regard. And that episode, I think, is the most emotional experience we've had making the show, because it did feel like kind of a unified front of like all of us coming together to like have this story kind of be told once and for all from the inner circle, if you will. And so that was really the experience. To be a fly on the wall kind of for that was really heavy and did take a toll on me. The Owen Hart episode, I remember also being one that I remember just like that affecting me on a personal level really heavily, in terms of after the interviews and, everyone. I mean, it's like, even with Jim Cornette, here's a guy who's such a loudmouth, guy, and who's just, freewheeling all the time. And then to see him break down, and then the effect that it had, because, you're with these guys after the interview, of course, and you can just sense that, wow, everyone's just been re-crushed. I remember Jim Ross. Jim Ross, when we go to Jim Ross's house, I think it was during the Pillman filming. Yeah, it was. We were at Jim Ross's house, doing the interview, and he was telling the story about Brian, and he was so close to Brian, loved Brian, and he was talking about being at the funeral or whatever, and you could tell he was very emotionally affected by that moment. And then because we have the little device on the front of the camera that allows them to look directly into the lens, and they can still see my face. And he was making the comment like, Jesus Christ, this guy just, keeps coming to my house, and I have to just like stare into this box telling him the darkest things that have ever happened in my life. It's like, it's like, I know I feel so bad, but for the most part, I think that it does become a cathartic experience at the end of it. That's my hope. Yeah. I think, to have this finally out, or for some I've heard, when they tell us that they have some more sense of a closure after they go there with the episode or the topic. And that's really, I think what we hope. And for all of this is I think it's better to talk about these things rather than to like, sweep them under the rug or never mention it again, So, but yeah, can have a huge effect on all of us. I mean, I know one more thing on that subject is just with the Grizzly Smith episode, like I know, Jason Cook, who's our editor on that episode, that's been tough for him to cut every single day and to be, to work on that story because, it's hard stuff. Hard stuff.
That's pretty heavy stuff.
Yeah.
I like this question here from Dan Barber. You mentioned this off camera to us, but I'm sure plenty of people are curious about this. the guys behind Dark Side of the Ring, do you guys follow wrestling now to any degree?
Well, there's just not enough time to follow it as closely as we do, but occasionally I'll kind of be, swept up in like an angle that's happening, or I'll just catch the highlights and be like, oh, that's cool, Like I did tune in for the GCW event, because I knew that what was going on, and it was cool just to see Nick back again in his thing, just to see how they if they would mention the episode, which they did, which was cool, and all that stuff. So sometimes I get pulled into a certain angle, but wrestling for me, it's like, and I don't mean to be like wrestling, but like it is a little hard for me to watch the more mainstream stuff. Like AEW's got some cool, interesting stuff, and there's a lot of guys on that roster, and there's a lot of women on that roster too that are awesome that I love to see. I just can't wait to see what happens next. Like MJF always blows my mind, and there's great stuff happening there. But for the most part, it's that production quality of the wrestling today that is hard for me. I can't watch WWE because of the shaky camera and the thing and this and the costumes, especially the costumes and the haircuts are but I don't know. So not often. I'm usually going back to watching old stuff. If anything, if I got that time, I'm throwing on FMW, or something like that.
Yeah. Moses Poses has a question about more recent stuff, but what recent wrestler stories are you potentially interested in covering?
Recent wrestler stories. Again, I think there's definitely one that comes to mind, but again, it's one of those I got to keep on the DLs.
Okay, all right.
But there definitely is one, but nothing else really comes to mind on that, unfortunately.
This is a personal favorite question of mine. From the enforcer Stevie Bradley. Is there any way have you ever looked into the Sid versus Arn scissors incident as a potential topic? I mean, it's a bit goofier, but also really dark.
I don't know if it's goofy, guys. It's pretty horrific.
I guess it's so weird that I consider it goofy, but like a guy almost got stabbed to death. I
just remember watching the Vader, I think it was Vader's shoot interview on it, and where he was like, I think it was Bam Bam or Vader. Maybe it was Vader, right? I think he was there, wasn't he?
Yeah. There's a terrific, there's like a compilation where somebody took everybody who was there that night that's ever talked about it and
did like a supercut,
like detailing the incident. And it's like one of the top viewed things on YouTube about that incident. It's pretty good.
Okay, I'm gonna have to take a look at that. A couple things on that. One is it's obviously been on our radar since the dawn of time with Dark Side of the Ring. How could you not be? Historically, amongst our team, it's felt like one of those stories that how do you make it an hour, kind of thing. That being said, there have been stories, some in season 3, where historically we've said the same thing. Mm-hmm. And now I'm finding that the episodes that are actually, and I don't want to use the term easier to make, but the ones that kind of fall into place nice and smooth are the ones that focus on an individual incident, and it's interesting to see how like an event, like a collision in Korea, or dare I open the can of worms of mentioning Plane Ride from Hell on this interview. But, like those are incidents and those are moments in time. And those tend to actually be the ones that really, I feel like work really well in our format. Because when you tend to get into the bio thing, you run into kind of the Pillman thing where it's like, it's hard to do this unless you really unless you have that extra hour. So that being said, who knows? Maybe when I think that's only a 20-minute story, maybe it's not. That being said, Arn Anderson, I think, has gone on record to say, "Oh, hell no," on his podcast that he would never do it. But you never say never, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, dude, like I said, you're gonna have 30 episodes, 30 hours. I mean, I wonder if, and I'm just wondering if he gets asked this question so many times that to put a final lid on it. Look, I did the episode. Nobody bother me about this again.
refer to the episode.
Refer to the episode. Maybe you can do that thing. Yeah.
And I love Arn. I mean, just to be perfectly clear,
yeah.
I could totally see just like, those slow-mo spine busters that we film in the reenactments like all day. Yeah, give it to me.
Yeah. That'd be awesome. All right. Well, we're going to stop taking up your time. We know you're very busy. Thank you so much for taking out some time to come talk to us today.
Of course. Yeah, thanks, Sheriff. Thanks for having me back, and just really excited to see. There's definitely some episodes this season that are going to be some hot topics of debate. So,
are there any that we haven't asked you about that you sort of want to talk about a little bit? You just mentioned the plane ride from hell. What's
oh Lord,
yeah.
Well, I think that the plane ride from hell. I've seen some chatter already on the internet. For those in the know, I think that's a story that's going to be very interesting. I know it's been very interesting for us to rediscover because it's a story that, again, was on our, like the Arn Scissor thing. It's been on our radar as fans as this kind of tomfoolery, kind of, party gone sideways thing. But man, my mind expanded to something that is one of the more anxiety-inducing episodes, I think.
Wow.
Definitely maybe the number one in terms of anxiety-inducing episode that we put together. So I think that's going to be there's going to be a lot for people to discuss after that comes out. I mean, it's very early stages for us in terms of making it. So that one for sure. We didn't mention the Grizzly Smith. We talked a little bit about it, but that episode in particular, I think, you asked about cinematic influences earlier. I forgot to mention Beyond the Mat, obviously being one that, inspired us in such many ways, because it's the first time you really saw kind of this rawness, behind the scenes. And Jake Roberts drops a lot of bombs in that, in that movie about his family life and his sister who was kidnapped and his siblings and or he doesn't really talk much about his siblings, but he talks about his family, and that to us was always been this thing of like curiosity, like expand upon what you're talking about, and I need to know more about this, and that's how we really approached this episode, and thankfully we got, because not a lot of people know Jake Roberts comes from a wrestling family. Like his dad's a wrestler, his sister's a wrestler, his brother's a wrestler. There's no Smith family wrestling. We don't talk about that as a dynasty, So I think that's going to be very eye-opening to a lot of people. I would say definitely, warning, it is probably, like I said, one of the more difficult episodes to watch for a lot of different reasons. But one I'm very looking forward to because I think it's very powerful, and all that. And Jake is incredible and everything, and Rockin' Robin's incredible. But I think that's really it. I'm also excited for Luna Vachon. I mean, we didn't touch on that one, but she's just wow, what a personality. And I think that story I didn't know a lot about going into, and now I've just been like, wow, this is a Dark Side of the Ring episode, like through and throughout. Like this is really going to be fantastic. So that's great. The broadcast schedule, is that cut in half as well? You're going to do one batch and then take a break and then another batch? That's right. It's so basically you're going to have the 6 weeks now. So you'll have the Brian Pillman 2-part episode, and then you'll have the next episodes for the next 5 weeks after that. And then there's a little bit of an off season, if you will. And then we're going to come back later in I think the late summer. It hasn't been announced exactly the date yet, but we're going to come back and have the back episodes for the second part of the season. So it's kind of like Sopranos season 6, That's how they do everything these days. Well, when the second half of season 3 debuts, maybe in advance of that, we can bring you guys back, and we can chat about the first batch, then we can chat about production on the second batch. Oh, that'd be great. That'd be great. All right, that'd be awesome, Evan. Well, thank you again so much. We definitely appreciate it. Yeah, we appreciate it too. Thanks, guys. Help support Going In Raw today by becoming a Friendo Club TV member. You'll get access to new bonus episodes every week, including Friendo Club Arcade, Live Power Rank, Vintage 10 for the Wins, and Ask Steven Larson. Get access to Friendo Club TV today by becoming a $5 and up patron at patreon.com/Steven Larson, by throwing us a sub at twitch.tv/Steven Larson, or by clicking join at youtube.com/Steven Larson.